You know, on the day of the prisoner exchange, when our plane was taking off from Moscow airport, the FSB convoy officer who was sitting to my left turned to me and said, "Look out of the window. This is the last time you're seeing your motherland." And I just laughed in the guy's face and I said, "Look, man, I am a historian. I not only think, I not only believe, I know that I'll be back in Russia, in my home country, and that's going to happen much quicker than you can ever imagine."
I guess the first question for both of you is how are the two of you now? I know you had a long wait and he had a long wait. Where are you with perhaps the feelings, the PTSD of that time when he was away and knowing the sentence that he faced? How are you now, Evgenia?
Well, the PTSD is there. All anxiety connected with this kind of work, always being in the spotlight, public advocacy around the world on behalf of Russian civil society, on behalf of political prisoners in the Russian Federation. But we're together. We are together, and we get to do this together, and we get to fly everywhere together and spend time together. And many people are deprived of that now because the war in Ukraine and repression in Russia have broken up, separated and destroyed millions and millions of families. So we are among those lucky ones who are still blessed with having each other, and that is something that I will forever be grateful for.
Oh, fantastic. You, not to put words in your mouth, you feel compelled, obviously, with your speaking and your columns and everything else. You feel compelled to be as loud as possible about all of this. Do you feel free, as long as you are here, to continue speaking?
Well, first of all, I'm feeling totally surreal, as if I've been watching some kind of a movie for these past several weeks, because I was absolutely convinced that I was going to die in that Siberian prison. And this international prisoner exchange that saved 16 lives, 16 human souls from the hell that is Vladimir Putin's modern-day gulag was a miracle. That's the only way I can describe it, but it was in so many ways a human-made miracle. It's made possible because of relentless advocacy by good people in democratic nations who never stop speaking out and shouting about political prisoners locked up in Putin's Russia. And these efforts have shown very clearly that international public opinion matters, and that international public opinion is, at the end of the day, stronger than any dictatorship can ever hope to be. And to your question about responsibility, now that I and 15 others have been saved from Putin's gulag, I wake up every morning and go to bed every night thinking about all of those that are left behind. We have more political prisoners in Russia today than there were in the whole of the Soviet Union, so that's 15 countries put together in its later years in the middle of the 1980s. The situation with politically motivated imprisonment in Vladimir Putin's Russia is reaching crisis proportions. And the fastest growing category on that political prisoner list are those Russians who have spoken out against the war in Ukraine. And for so many of these political prisoners, it is not only a question of unjust, unfair, unlawful, politically motivated imprisonment, although that in itself will be unacceptable in the 21st century. But for so many, it's very literally a question of life or death. And so we need to make sure that these exchanges continue. We need to make sure that other people whose only quote-unquote crime was to have an opinion that happens to differ from the opinion of the government are saved from the hell of Putin's modern-day gulag where they are currently. And as for speaking out, look, I've been doing this for 25 years. I've been in Russian opposition politics since 1999. I've always spoken out, you know, at home in Russia. This is where I was arrested. And now that I'm finding myself in this new and strange situation when I was forcefully expelled out of my own country, I will, of course, absolutely continue to speak out here. First and foremost, to speak out on behalf of all those political prisoners locked up in Russia, because, you know, the media has sort of talked a lot about the fact that our prisoner exchange on August 1st was the largest East-West prisoner exchange since the times of the Cold War, and that is absolutely true. But what makes this exchange really historic, in my mind, is that Western governments, in particular the US and the German governments, insisted that this exchange included not only their own citizens, so Western hostages held in Russian prisons, but also Russian prisoners of conscience. And by doing so, these governments have sent, first of all, a very powerful message of solidarity to all those Russians who believe in a peaceful and democratic future for our country. But they also have sent a very clear message that they know, that the free world knows, that the real criminals are those people in the Kremlin who have started the war in Ukraine, not those of us who are in prisons because we had opposed it.
Certainly, certainly. And one of your most recent columns, you talked about cracks that you see in Putin's regime. Do you sense that they're getting wider, if those cracks are indeed there?
Look, I'm not just a politician, I'm a historian by education, and we know that major political changes in Russia happen like this. Suddenly, unexpectedly, nobody's ever ready for them. Both the Tsarist regime in the early 20th century and the communist regime in the late 20th century collapsed in 3 days. And I mean this literally, not a figure of speech. None of us knows exactly how, when, in what circumstances the Putin regime will collapse. But we do know that it will, because nothing is forever. I don't just believe, I'm absolutely convinced. And I know, again, not because I think so, because I know as a historian, that the next time there will be political changes in Russia, they will again happen suddenly, swiftly and unexpectedly, which means that we have to be ready. Because the big problem with the 1990s was that people were not ready for that change. The Soviet regime collapsed so quickly and so suddenly that nobody, and I mean both people in Russia and people in the West, nobody was ready for that. And that is why so many mistakes were made. That's why so many opportunities were missed. And we are all living with the consequences of that botched democratic transition in Russia in the 1990s today. Of course, we are living with it in Russia. People are living with it every day in Ukraine, with bombs raining on their heads. And frankly, the whole of Europe and the whole of international communities living with those consequences. Because the way Russia operates is that when you have a government that disrespects the rights of its own citizens, it's not going to respect civilized rules of international behavior. Domestic repression and external aggression, when it comes to Russia, are two sides of the same coin. And so when there is a democratic government in Russia, that is going to be in the interests not just of us Russian citizens, that goes without saying, but it is going to be in the interests of the whole of the international community, because the only way we would ever be able to ensure long-term peace, stability and security on the European continent, the only way that Europe can finally become truly whole, free and at peace with itself is with a democratic Russia. And that is a goal that we should all be working towards.
Certainly. Where do you two call home now? Temporarily, I guess?
Well, we're mostly on the plane, to be honest. But,
We are based on the plane.
the home base formerly where our kids are is near Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
Washington, D.C., certainly, certainly. Well, I was going to ask, do you foresee a time when you can go back to Russia? Or do you dream of it, or do you believe in your heart that there will be a time when you can safely go back to Russia?
That's our goal. We have 3 kids. They are fully bilingual. They can read and write and speak both English and Russian.
Fantastic.
And Russian is a big part of their culture. They've been to Russia many times, but of course we realize that it is now not safe for them to be there, and we want, we're striving to get to that Russia, to build that Russia that will be a safe place for them, of course. And we want them to be able to choose where they live, where they work, based on, not on their interests and not on whether it is safe or not, like it is today.
Yes.
So that's the goal.
Certainly.
On the day of the prisoner exchange, when our plane was taking off from Moscow airport, the FSB convoy officer who was sitting to my left turned to me and said, "Look out of the window. This is the last time you're seeing your motherland." And I just laughed in the guy's face and I said, look man, I am a historian. I not only think, I not only believe, I know that I'll be back in Russia, in my home country, and that's going to happen much quicker than you can ever imagine.
Yeah. You knew you were about to be free. You could tell that to him. Yes. One more question.
I told everything that I believed in and I thought while I was in prison. That wasn't, that wasn't had no bearing on my thinking.
We are having this brief conversation on the first day of voting here in the United States. And I can at least say that from what we've seen, people are actively lining up to vote. Anything you would perhaps offer as advice to Americans who don't understand fully what a right this is, when it is at the very least a tainted vote in Russia? Somewhat more. I mean, when you see Americans voting today, how does that make you feel with the freedom that they have?
We're jealous. Honestly, we're very envious of Americans because they have this right, as we are of citizens of any democratic country. We don't have free and fair elections in Russia. We don't have the freedom of speech. We don't have the freedom of assembly or association. All the freedoms have been taken away from the Russian people. We live in a very, in a society that has been isolated by the regime from the entire world. And you only get the picture that the Russian propaganda wants you to see, of that entire population standing unanimous behind Putin and his war in Ukraine. And we are here to tell you that a different Russia exists. We work with these people. We see them every day. Vladimir's vice president and I am advocacy director at the Free Russia Foundation, a civil society organization that promotes, supports and encourages pro-democracy and anti-war initiatives, a whole myriad of them. So we know these people working on the ground in Russia, we want these people working outside of the country, and we know that this potential for a different Russia exists. And you know, there is, we're sitting in the Bush Center Library, and there is a very nice quote by President Bush, somewhere here in this building on the wall, and says, it's about an open society ordered by moral conviction. That is what lies at the basis of a democratic system. And people living anywhere in democracies should remember about that. That it's all about an open society ordered by moral conviction.
And I just want to say that I'm very envious of countries where you do not know the name of the election winner in advance. That's a luxury we haven't had in Russia for a quarter of a century. We haven't had a free and fair election in 25 years. And so, to people who do live in democracies, such as this country, I would say value it, use it, and never take it for granted.